Ladies and gentlemen, today we are going to be crowning a champion in the region of China for the MDI. My name is Rich. I am your host, and I am joined by Salute and Nagora on the desk to kick off the day and to get that first match under control. And guys, we started out with the 8 best teams in the region. Now only 6 are going to be remaining. And Nagora, we've seen a whole bunch of different compositions coming out from these teams.
Yeah, we've seen some crazy compositions coming out with Arms Warriors. We saw Disc Priest. We saw Shamans even. We saw no healer comes. It was crazy.
All right, so already we know that we can expect to see a whole lot today. We know that we're going to be seeing who our champion actually is, and we are ultimately going to see the 2 top teams in China that will progress to the global finals. But let's not get carried away from ourselves, Ted. Before we actually start looking ahead to the future, we should talk about how these teams actually made it here to this tournament in the first place.
Yeah, so of course the biggest focus point is really the time trials that we're talking about, aside for the the quarters yesterday. But there's a big difference. We always talk about how the time trials don't really fully represent how the tournament's going to go. They have all week to really focus on 24 hours a day, unlimited pulls on the dungeons, 3-set dungeon. They already have the set affixes. Now all of a sudden it's one mistake, and we saw those mistakes happen yesterday. One mistake could just cost you that match and then your tournament life as well.
Yeah, so very much it's important to note that the time trial is going to be very different than what you do see here. It is going to be kind of that one attempt at the dungeon, double elimination tournament, best of 3. So you're going to be moving through those maps. The first one to take down 2 going to move forward. If you haven't lost yet, if you're in that winner's portion of the bracket, you're going to drop down. And that kind of brings us to our bracket. We have to actually talk about where these teams are, because yesterday, at the end of the day, we pretty much rounded out the whole day with 2 of those elimination matches, and we saw some teams go home. And now we're going to be kicking today off with those elimination matches, Nagora. No Healer versus CBA is going to be the match that we have to think about.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see if they're actually going to pull out the healer again, because we saw in the first round they were really comfortable and they played without the healer actually, but then in the second round they pulled out the shaman, they had to play with a healer, and then they turned to an elemental shaman, and it didn't go so well the second time around. So we will see if they actually bring a healer this time or not.
And the other thing, Ted, that I definitely want to talk about while we have this beautiful bracket in front of our eyes, we got Skyline D and Sunsky. Neither of these teams have dropped a series yet in our tournament.
That's going to be a big match. I'm really excited for that later. I mean, they're just the big dogs at the moment. But, not to say, I mean, Skyline top really, yes, they got 2-0'd in the end, but they really held their own in that series. And same with Sunsky. I mean, they didn't have the easiest series in the world. So those 2 Titans are going to clash, and I'm looking forward to it.
And, started to allude at some of the stuff that we need to be thinking about. We talked about how these teams have gotten here. We've given you a taste of the order that we're going to see it all unfold and some of the compositions that we may see. But we need to talk about the real reason that all of these teams are here, what they are playing for. There is a massive prize pool, not only here, but for the global finals. And we need to start talking about that because, yes, there is that prize pool on the line. First place going to be taking home $6,000 of that prize pool. But the bigger picture is the top 2 teams from the region will progress to the global finals. We're just getting the party started here. We are going to be doing this week after week. We are going to put every region to the test, and the 2 top teams, Ted, from each of those regions will actually move forward to compete against each other at the first LAN for the Mythic Dungeon Invitational.
Yeah, I mean, it's really exciting. And the thing is, at the moment, the teams don't really know who they're going to face, which seed from which region. And now we have that kind of extra emphasis of some extra prize money on top of it for each region. So extra incentive to really get that first place, first seed, and just really show what you're made of. Make a statement.
I mean, yeah, there are plenty of statements to be made. And now we can actually start to talk about that first match in detail. We know why they're here. We know what they're playing for. A lot on the line for the region of China. But now let's talk about No Healer versus CBA. So Nagora, No Healer. Sometimes they actually play with no healer.
Sometimes they have to, yeah. Yesterday we saw Black Recalled. It was 2 healing affixes, so they had to play with a healer, because I'm not sure if they tried without a healer and just didn't work out, and they figured they have to play with a shaman. And then they ended up playing with elemental shaman because you can switch specs, you just can't switch classes. But we will see if they actually manage to pull lower carries. It's going to be difficult, I think, especially because it is necrotic.
That's a very important thing to note as well. The fact that you are somewhat locked when you actually do pick which class you're going to play. Yes, you can change specs, you can change talents in the round, but once you've actually locked in which class you're going to play, that is a change. You are pretty much married to that class for the entire series.
Yeah, I mean, that's just right. The first series that they kind of played with the 4 DPS, they had the extra Havoc Demon Hunter instead of that Shaman. So I expect we're going to see the Shaman from them. Whether it's Elemental or Resto, we'll have to see. But, we're increasing. I mean, it's not a small step to go between 22 to 23 into 24. I mean, we saw the numbers just weren't adding up for them at the end of that Cathedral run yesterday. It was really sloppy, a lot of deaths at the end. So I'm I think we're going to see the healer game.
And that's the other thing with how these matches are actually going to unfold. You have varying map pools that are going to happen. Yesterday, we saw a bunch of keys actually play out at that 22 difficulty. Today, it's just going to be the difficulty of 23 and 24. And today, for these next 2 rounds, we are going to be starting on Lower Karazhan. And these are both going to be elimination rounds, no healer versus CBA. And let's talk about this Lower Karazhan key, Nagora, because we have set affixes that they will be facing.
Yes, it's going to be fortified. We are also going to see volcanic and necrotic. So the problem with necrotic is, especially in lower, there's a lot of very big trash pulls they have to do, and it's going to be very hard in the tank to deal with those necrotic stacks.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Ted, that's something that...
Yeah, I mean, but, you know, DKs are fairly well built. We're going to see a lot of tier 21 2-piece being brought out, so you get that extra parry chance, and if the mobs aren't successfully meleeing you, then you don't get those extra stacks. So with that tier 21 2-piece, they're going to have, you know, reduction constantly on their dancing rune weapon, and they're going to be able to pop that frequently for these big pulls and really kind of offset a lot of the stacks that wouldn't otherwise upfront them before they're forced to start kiting.
All right, well, we know what everyone is playing for. We know what is on the line, and we know how the entire day is going to work. Let's get this party started. First match of the day is an elimination match. Once this series is over, only the 5 top teams from China will remain in contention. Championship Sunday starts now.
Here we are again.
Here we are again.
So right off the bat, we see most of these teams usually try to skip that spirit. Of course, right away we see the control undead from both of the blood DKs as they go up. And some of the trash coming up in this hall is really dangerous with the pennies from heaven. Of course, we're no stranger to that coin toss either.
Oh yeah, we also see no healer actually playing without a healer this time around. It's going to be very interesting to see how they do that, especially with necrotic and fortified.
But not just that, they committed to no shaman at all. So they're not going to have that choice later at all of even converting to a healer. So they're trapped for the entire series with just 4 DPS. We're going to have to keep an eye on it. Both teams opt to kind of stealth through that top part of the balcony on their way to that first opera event. Here we're going to see a substantial pull with that Skystep potion coming in from the blood DK.
Yeah, I wonder if they have someone trigger the event actually. Oh, we see 2 deaths actually on the other side. I'm wondering if they do it on purpose and just rest them up later on, or if they didn't manage to do the invis potion properly or the shroud.
Yes, we do see a full skip from Team CBA. In the meantime, no healer is opting to kill some of that trash over there. Now, keep in mind, there is an Usher involved as well. That is not tauntable. They will have to kind of turn around for its flashlight, make sure that the tank's holding aggro. In the meantime, of course, CBA starting that RP for the Opera event, which does take a bit of time. So it's usually pretty smart. Oftentimes, teams pull some of this trash while the healer kind of runs downstairs, starts the RP, and then we get ready to go.
Yeah, that's why usually you see with a Rester Druid, you can have the healer stealth through and trigger the event while the rest of the team kills some trash packs in the meantime. Because, of course, waiting here and doing nothing is not very efficient.
That is true. It is not. And if I'm not mistaken, so we do see both teams, of course, releasing that spirit that they do MC earlier. They will kind of cleave that down during that RP, making it somewhat efficient, as you were saying. Now, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, we will be seeing that kind of Beauty and the Beast event with all the, you know, the pots and pans and the brooms and everyone hanging out, and of course, Coggleston at the end.
Yeah, so it's also going to be interesting to see which one they focus, because there's a couple of different strategies you can do on this boss. We see some teams focus the broom first, which fixates on random people, and if it goes through the fire, then it goes faster. If it actually reaches its target, then it's disorientating people, and it's not very good on top of everything else going on.
Right. And of course, we also do have the other strat being Luminor first, where he throws often fire patches out, as we can see some forming already. Now, you can actually counter those fire patches by getting that drench debuff from the pot that's throwing it out, but oftentimes players opt to just kind of get them out of the way first, make sure they have not too much real estate taken up in the meantime. Of course, every time you kill one of the members in the squad, the others will heal to max HP, so there's not too much efficiency in cleaving them outside of trying to boost your single target damage, and Coggleston himself, the stove in the back, will only be accessible once the first 3 are dead.
Yeah, exactly. And then we also see there's some important interrupts you have to do. A heat wave, for example, that doesn't AoE damage on the whole group that is important to interrupt. And then there's some other key interrupts that they need to do in this group. But I think no healer shouldn't have a problem with this, as they have 5 people with interrupts. And
interestingly enough, actually, they didn't do either of the strategies that you and I alluded to. They actually killed the soup first. Nonetheless, they're having no problem cleaning it up. Of course, Bablet, the broom, being killed last by both teams, after which we'll have access to Coggleston. Now, once Coggleston is accessible, he will occasionally spawn some forks that will stab you in the eyes, and they are very painful as a tank, leaving that bleed dot on you. Of course, there's a couple of cast interrupt as well, one increasing the tank damage taken, and one increasing the haste of all surrounding enemies. So if these teams fail to kind of keep those forks in check, and they let one of those cast through, it could get out of hand.
Yeah, we see CBA is actually quite a bit faster than no healer, which is weird because as obviously they don't have a healer, so they should have more DPS.
That's true. So, no, that is kind of weird. I'm not really sure where they're lacking a lot of their damage, but I mean, we can kind of see the numbers on both screen. You know, the DK on the side of CBA is doing a bit more damage. You know, it all kind of adds up at the end of the day. Nonetheless, they're both working on Coggleston. In the meantime, CBA just a bit lower. They're kind of dragging it across the stage right now, making sure that they're keeping those forks together and getting as much damage out as possible on them. Now, if I'm not mistaken, I could be mistaken on this, I believe you can spell steal the haste buff that come from the forks, which is why the mage kind of skyrocketed there. I'll have to double check on that. We'll ask some of our good mage friends about this after, but I believe you can do that. So you let one of the casts go through. Coggleston does indeed fall, and the team will be ready to move to the backstage.
All right, now here we're going to see some big pulls, I believe so. There's a lot of trash coming here. On the very first trash pull they're doing here, it's not very important to interrupt them, to see them, but it is necrotic, so the tank probably has to kite them.
Indeed they do, and yeah, necrotic's a big problem, as we mentioned, in this dungeon for the tank, and a lot of kiting is needed here as well too, just to make sure you get out of that spotlight. That does do a tremendous amount of damage once the ads end up exploding with that swirly too. Now, downstairs is a particularly dangerous path. So both of these teams have, of course, gained backstage access, and they'll be moving downstairs. But exactly what I was just about to mention, Team No Healer having a lot of issue with getting the proper interrupts on some of these ads. I'm not sure how they got pulled from downstairs, though, but if you don't interrupt that Firelands portal cast, it will, well, generate a portal from the Firelands where a very evil mob will come in and likely kill the rest of your party, as we're seeing them struggle a lot right now. 3 deaths on the board for them, the tank barely staying alive, and it looks like it's going to be a full team wipe over there.
Yeah, this is devastating for them. I feel like this was one of their strats with 4 DPS coming in, just pulling a lot. We see the Demon Hunter actually doing a lot of damage on CBA. They managed to do the big pull without a problem. They had enough interrupts and everything going well for them.
Of course, that DH trying to cosplay an Arcane Mage in BRH right now, doing an excellent job with those numbers. Huge amount of damage, well to kite at the end too. The tank not getting in too much danger with those necrotic stacks. Now, moving up, of course, we do have the packs of ushers here. Note that these are not the popular R&B artist usher. These are actually the evil skeletal ushers in the dungeon. They are tankable only through pure aggro. You cannot taunt them, and they can be displaced, of course, with punts and stuff to try to kind of offset their flashlight ability.
Yeah, we see No Healer actually took another route, so that's the good part about Lower Karasan. If you actually wipe after the Opera event, you can just release and go another route through another door, and they're actually probably going to go to Maiden first, I assume.
The problem with that, of course, is that oftentimes it kind of messes up your Bloodlust or Heroism timer, so I'm sure they have some kind of backup plan for that. CBA, in the meantime, of course, working down the more traditional route around the front of that stage for Opera, and likely, I will assume, they'll be going over to Maiden as well, along the kind of hallway that we're seeing No Healer work towards as well. At the moment, between the two teams, they're kind of meeting in that middle foyer. Of course, they don't see each other because they're separate instances, but they will be kind of both aiming to go towards that hallway as we see Team No Healer rearing up to go.
Yeah, so the Ashes are going to go down at CBA. I wonder if they're going to do the very big pull in the hallway here. It's a lot of mobs, and it is necrotic. They also do not have a Warlock. A Warlock is very good with necrotic because he does have the legendary slow ring that slows the mobs, and it makes it very easy for the tank to kite. But they don't have a Warlock, so let's see if they can pull it off.
Right, Shirai, so a huge pull here. Now, the DK can usually get about 66% uptime on that D&D slow, which is 70% here. They have no problem, though. I mean, they absolutely melt these mobs, no problem. The DK easily running away in the meantime, dropping that D&D well ahead of the pack so that they run into that 70% slow. They absolutely annihilate everything CBA do, and now they're moving over to that second set of ushers, and they'll soon be going around the hall where we are currently seeing No Healer on the left side. Now, there's a lot of dangerous trash in this hallway, a lot of kind of one-shot capabilities from some of these mobs, Nagura.
Yeah, so they actually pulled the whole hallway to the Maiden room. There's some sentries that don't move very easily because they're ranged hunters pretty much. They did go around the corner and line of sight them, then the mobs actually have to walk to them and group up pretty much. And yeah, there's some very difficult abilities, especially like the Shield Slam, which is a frontal stun that the tank needs to avoid. If he gets stunned, obviously he's going to die with necrotic and fortified and everyone hitting him. So,
or of course, in my case, I will point it into the melee and let them get stunned instead, and then blame them for not moving. Now, let's talk a bit about Maiden here, as we do see No Healer pulling her right now. She really has kind of 2 phases, let's say. In the first phase, she will cast Consecrate on one of the players that will need to run it out of the group as it expands quite quickly, adding a huge area denial to the room, and will put a 15-second dot on you if you touch that consecrated ground. Also, there is a Holy Bolt that will kind of chain between targets, so it's important for the melee and the range to spread out as well. Finally, there's an Interrupt nuke that needs to be, well, interrupted, of course, on the tank. Otherwise, it hits quite hard, making them take increased damage for the rest of the fight. Now, the most most important mechanic, of course, is once she gets that shield on herself and starts casting that spell.
Yeah, she casts a spell that she sees everyone, and the only way to get out of it is if you yourself take damage. So we see those zones on the side of the room where everyone has to step into it to get a dot on them that takes for a damage every 1 second. And once he gets CC'd by the boss, then the CC actually gets removed by this dot.
Yeah, so you do have to break through that barrier, of course, in order to interrupt your spell that will one-shot you. We've seen this theme with a few other bosses. Looks like they should, they should have no trouble doing it. They do have 4 DPS right now. They are just breaking through it right now. Intelligently, of course, waiting to interrupt it at the very last second so that you get some kind of free DPS time on the boss without having to deal with too much of the mechanics. CBA now just moving to the end of the hall towards Maiden, as we can see in the background on the right side of the screen as well.
We also see the positioning very well by No Healer, as they have 4 melee DPS. We see them make a quadrant pretty much around the boss so they don't chain the holy bolts.
Right, you are. Yeah, no, really important for that. As we mentioned earlier, Team CBA just now getting ready to pull Maiden themselves. You know, let's keep an eye on the DPS numbers from the No Healer side right now, because almost a death there on the Havoc Demon Hunter on No Healer side. What I was going to say is because, they didn't really impress me on that first boss, considering they have no healer. They really should have out DPS CBA in that sense. So we'll have to keep an eye on what their kind of split times are here.
Now, it looks like they're very similar in time, but we can see on the enemy forces, No Healer is actually quite far behind, as they had this wipe earlier and they had to do another route. So they're in 36%, while CBA is on 50% already. Yeah,
so unfortunately, No Healer missed an opportunity to kind of pull ahead there. They did end up getting that second shield for the Mass Repentance from Maiden of Virtue, something that you're hoping to kind of beat with that 4 DPS comp. So unfortunately, they did it to no avail there. We'll have to keep an eye on CBA if they manage to do it. And, based on their DPS on the first boss, they might be able to pull it off. Nonetheless, No Healer choosing now to mass stealth across those ushers that they otherwise would have killed if they didn't have that wipe earlier, and they'll be jumping down in Morosa's room. And Nagura, there's a lot of trash in here, and I hate your Starfall in this room.
Okay, so it's very easy to mispull something here, but I would assume they just pull everything together, as we can see here, and nuke everything down. Now, the Bloodlust is almost ready. I assume they want to Bloodlust Morose, especially because they don't have a healer, and there's a lot of AoE going on. So the longer they fight, the more damage intake on the group, so they have to be very careful there without a healer.
And what's particularly dangerous about Morose in this setting, as well as that there's multiple ads on Morose. Of course, he has his 4 dinner guests serving up a storm. So the problem is that there's a lot of necrotic stacks constantly stacking on the tank, with not too much opportunity at times, depending on how quickly those ads die, to get that reset. So as you're saying, I do think they'll likely be waiting for that Bloodlust. In the meantime, of course, 15% on CBA's Maiden of Virtue.
All right, so they're just finishing off the last wardens here. I assume they're going to see 2 of the ads. They might go crazy and not to see at all, but then they buff each other and they get more haste, and all the casts are much faster and much more difficult to interrupt, and some of them are very deadly.
Yeah, so it is important to note that there's usually 6 dinner guests and 4 of them are chosen. It's in a random rotation every week. Today, I already see some of the names that we don't want to see in there. I'm not sure if Crispin is in there. He is. I do see his name. So Crispin is one of the more dangerous mobs, indeed, as we can see. And there's also Druger as well, but Crispin is really one to look out for, Nagura, because that a huge holy frontal.
Yeah, so he casts a frontal, which is a cast, and it is interruptible by knocks like a Typhoon or a Grip, especially. But the more the dinner guests are up at the same time, the faster he does the cast. So it's very important to see some of them. So the cast is, else it's almost immediately, and it's almost impossible to interrupt, and it will definitely kill some people.
Right, you are. So good. They do well there to CC 2 of the mobs. Of course, as we were discussing, Lord Crispin is indeed being melted in the meantime, making him extra crispy for his dinner with Morose. Now, they will also kill Druger because he does provide that kind of area denial on the melee, and they do have an all melee comp, so they want to, or excuse me, no, they have the Warlock as well, but the Warlock is choosing to kind of stick around on the outside and bait some of these range mechanics. They want to get him out of the way first. Now, I do assume that they'll break some of these dinner guests off a bit later as well, as they deal with the first 2.
Yeah, so now we see CBA is actually reaching the same room as well. They're in the same. They also have Bloodlust ready, so I assume they're going to pull the boss as well.
Yeah, so CBA probably going to do, I would assume, the same thing, CCing 2 of the mobs. Indeed, we do see, of course, Baron is being pulled down as well in the meantime, so they're choosing to kind of just now slowly incorporate the rest of the dinner guests with Morose, finishing them all off. Now, it is important. Let's discuss a couple of things about Morose himself as well. He will occasionally shadow step to a target, stunning them and applying one of his Garrote stacks. Now, he does apply a Garrote stack to each member of the party, and then he will start applying the second stacks as well. So we can see, of course, at the top of the screen, the Rogue is the only one who's not been hit so far, and this starts to get pretty out of hand right now. The other problem that we have to keep in mind is that he does do a debuff for 75% armor reduction on the tank. We just saw it now run out on the Blood DK. It is a magic debuff, it is dispellable, but there's nobody here who can dispel it for them right now.
I think a Warlock actually is able to dispel debuffs with a certain pet, but I'm not completely sure. And I'm not sure if they want to use it for this or not, but the tank seemed to be fine to tank the whole debuff by itself.
Yeah, no, it should be no problem really for the DK. They have frequent access to really strong CDs like Vampiric Blood. You are right, I believe they can dispel, but I'm not sure if that's a DPS loss for them, something they want to run. It's not too much of a problem for the DK to deal with it, so just keep an eye. Of course, we do see that debuff once again running its full course, so clearly they're not opting to dispel it. That's totally okay. Morose does go down. That was actually a really clean kill from Team No Healer, no problem. Now they're opting to go through the kitchen area. Keep in mind, they have a bunch of trash to make up because of their wipe.
Yeah, this is actually a very interesting pull. Not many teams I've seen doing this on live service especially, because there's some very interesting mobs that if not getting interrupted, or if you're in range and you don't kill them fast enough, it's going to be devastating for the group.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, we do see Morose now with Team CBA in the meantime. Just keep an eye on them in the right hand of the screen. They're starting to chisel through Morose. It doesn't look like they're really opting to kill some of the other dinner guests at the moment. They're all sitting at 100%. Nonetheless, this kitchen pull from No Healer goes absolutely flawlessly, and they're kind of running back and forth right now, deciding which way to go and what to pull next. They do, of course, still have to deal with Adaman in the downstairs stable area.
Yeah, so now we can see they're actually even in enemy forces. So both of them are in 60%. So No Healer pulled ahead. So on Ataman, we see that there's one debuff that actually needs to be dispelled, which is a magic debuff. So I assume that the Warlock has to use this other pet, even if it is a damage loss, to get rid of this debuff. I'm not sure if they could heal through it or not. They do have a lot of self.
I was going to say, maybe they're just opting to just, you know what, we get it, no problem, let's just deal with it. We'll have to keep an eye. But in the meantime, of course, we do have to deal with what is quite abundant trash in the stable area. The most important being here that there's a ton of interrupts that need to go out. The horses have a lot of casts and charges. We do have the stable hands that do a healing hand on one of the enemies that we want to make sure to interrupt as well. And then, of course, on the other side, we have some of those fire debuffs where the players will need to spread out with their circles.
Yeah, so those horses that do a charge that can be interrupted. We see CBA actually killed Morose now, so they're good to go to Ataman as well. No Healer is still finishing off this trash. There's a couple of trash. You need to clean the whole room, because if you pull the boss, then the rest of the trash is linked to the boss and will get pulled as well.
Team CBA also often to go through that kitchen area. They kind of want to see what's cooking and what Morose and his dinner guests were having for dinner. Now they're doing a bit more of a defensive pull. They've kind of pulled everything here and they're kiting it around the side of the room, whereas No Healer just kind of went right up front and AoE'd everything down. No Healer, of course, now still working on some of that Adaman trash. It is important to note, you know, some players wonder, why can't you just go pull Adaman? There's already, you know, a space to do so. He does pull everything in the stable around him if you do that. So you want to make sure to clear everything, especially with Necrotic being one of the affixes today.
Yeah, it is fortified, as I said earlier. So one of the some of those mobs do this a red circle around them, which is a dot. That's a lot of AoE damage, and it explodes at the very end. So it's interesting to see that they have so much self-healing to actually manage to go through this dot, and it actually stacks as well. So you can get 2 dots applied to one player.
Yeah, very dangerous. So now they'll be heading over along the left side to finish up what is, I believe they have 2 pulls left. Yeah, so they have, oh no, they actually have the 3 pulls left. They have this charger pull and then the 2 kind of bigger pulls right in front of
they're
Adaman.
doing actually a big pull here.
But they're leaving that last 5-pack, so they're doing kind of a 2-split pull thing here. Likely to, you know, wait for some of their CDs to come up and get ready to get, I mean, they have to kill Adaman quickly. And since we're kind of rearing up for Adaman right now, we do have 2 deaths coming up on Team No Healer. Maybe it's a good thing they didn't pull that 3rd pack, because they just incur another 10-second penalty, and they, of course, need to release and come back as well.
Yeah, maybe they can actually finish this off. We'll see the tank kiting here, so no one is really taking damage other than the dot that I was talking about earlier. It is quite a long walk back, so we'll see how they can recover here.
Yeah, so you can see they're already kind of intelligently kiting back to where the players that wiped will rejoin them, just to make sure that they can connect with those ads right away and DPS them down. The DH dropping so low again. Luckily, no other death coming out of them. They're finishing up the last 2 mobs here, after which they'll have that remaining 5-pack.
We see CBA actually did a very, very big pull, and we see the tank dying. So I'm not sure if they can finish this up, because everything is still very high HP. I think this was too risky for them.
That is very risky, and you know, if I'm CBA right now, is it really worth being so risky against, you know, I'm sure at this point they know the other team is kind of trying to crank it. They had some difficulties at a few wipes already, but nonetheless, a full wipe coming out of Team CBA. No Healer now working on the last trash pack before Adaman, but obviously they're only at 80% right now, so they won't fully be done with the dungeon once Adaman dies. The road getting so low, cheat death is not available either, so they'll have to be really careful, Nagura.
Yeah, so CBA, I think they tried a very, very big pull where they pulled all the left side together, and the tank was pulling it back out to line of sight on the other side. But the tank did not survive the pull, and they had to full wipe,
Yeah, you know, they've done that a couple of times where they do this huge pull and the tank kind of runs away. And I know obviously from live servers, and sometimes from healing as well, you really need that good communication with your healer, not to LOS. In the meantime, they're doing the exact same pull, so we'll have to see exactly how that works out for them. I do believe Perg is still available for the DK once again, but he's quite low at 15% HP, getting that heal up as they wait for the mobs to kind of round the corner. Now in the meantime, of course, Adaman has been pulled here. Adaman has dismounted for Midnight once he hits that 50% mark, and we do know when Adaman goes down, you have to hit that certain percentage threshold to make sure that he doesn't remount.
Yeah, so if you pull him underneath 30%, oh, we see the rogue dying here actually to the charge. Actually, I think he just didn't dodge. They actually have one battle rest. I'm not sure if they will get him up or not.
The DK getting really low there. Yeah, so they do indeed get him up, of course. A lot of damage coming out of Adam, and he's really not horsing around here. But eventually, he will actually remount, and you will have to get a lot of that DPS back to dismount him again. Now, these walls, Nagura, are very lethal if you get hit by them. And they spawn about 30 yards away from where Midnight repositions. So it's important to kind of either hug the boss, or I do understand some of the range try to kind of outrange. But you do run the risk of the wall spawning on you sometimes.
Exactly. So if you want to outrange the wall, then you have to be 40 yards away. I'm not sure why the rogue is not accepting the rest, because maybe they don't want to use it. Maybe they think they can finish off the boss without him. Maybe they want to save it for a later pull. I'm not sure. I
mean, it's possible. Maybe he just had to AFK because his pizza got there at the door. Who knows? Only they know, of course. In the meantime, CBA now just working around the side. And they have succeeded in their pull and have just now pulled Adaman as well. The dismount, their first dismount has happened indeed here. In the meantime, we do know that Adaman will remount Midnight once Midnight is healed to 100% HP. So they're trying ever so hard to make sure that Adaman reaches that threshold so there's no remount.
This is actually very, very close. As we can see, CBA already has 100% enemy forces. So once Adaman dies for CBA, then the dungeon will be finished, while no healer has to kill the boss and still kill 15% of enemy forces.
Yeah, so they did manage here to finally finish Adaman himself off. Midnight now will do 100% increased damage and take 100% increased damage. The debuff does get dispelled in the group, as we did see there. We were talking about that, so the Warlock's helping to dispel that. Oh no, actually they did remount. My mistake. I thought they finished Adaman off, but we do see those kind of ponies walls reforming here, meaning they actually missed their threshold. So I think that's going to be super costly because, as you said, not only do they need to kill Adaman, but they need to go upstairs and do a huge trash pull after this. So at the moment, this is really CBA's to lose.
Yeah, no healer also has one more death, which is only 5 seconds difference. But yeah, if CBA finishes off this boss, it's over for them. So we'll see if no healer can catch up.
So no healer finally does kill Adaman himself. Midnight now will take 100% increased damage, but also dish out 100% increased damage with that AoE stomp. So players will have to be careful not to get too low before that stomp comes out. There it is right now. Oh, not too much damage. Only the Rogue and the Havoc go down. The Havoc, of course, immediately healing back up. Adaman about to go down on Team CBA right now. They did finally finish. No healer finally finished Adaman. They're running upstairs, scrambling, making sure they're getting ready to pull whatever trash they can and finish that last 15%. In the meantime, Adaman finally goes down for Team CBA, and it's just a matter of time before they should take this match.
Yeah, this is so close. They're gonna pull. They can pull everything in this room, and I'm not sure if it will give them 15%. It's probably not. They have to pull more than that. They do have Bloodlust soon, but it's gonna be very, very close as CBA's already on Midnight, 50%.
Not to mention that they have that extra 5 seconds to make up for that extra death. That wipe at the beginning of the instance was just too costly for them in terms of trash percentage. They should have thought about it ahead of time and maybe pulled some extra, or maybe they planned as their recovery plan to pull some of this trash, but it's just not nearly enough. And Team CBA is going to take this first match.
And just like that, Team CBA is one step closer to sending no healer home. And I can't even stress enough how crucial this matchup really is, that first game for a team like no healer. If you didn't get to watch yesterday, it was definitely something that we talked about quite a bit, because with a team like this, you go into that first map and it's pretty much everything, because you're going to have to play out of your mind in the second map when you don't have the pick, and then you kind of need that cushion to actually select again in the third. But I will say, for Team No Healer, there were some very difficult things that they had to do inside of the dungeon. I'm even thinking about Moreau's, Ted. That is not an easy thing for them to do, and you saw how they actually had to rotate defensives.
And that was actually a really impressive kill by them. I know it was clean. You know, they CC'd properly. They killed the right mobs properly. I'm more thinking exactly along what you just said. I think it was really, really important for them to win this first match because they locked in a non-hybrid class as their 5th. They don't have the option now to go back and respect to Arresto Shaman. So if they won that first map, then they had the opportunity to then potentially lose the second map, but then have pick on the third map, which they don't now. They have pick on the second map, something that likely plays to their strengths with 4 DPS. But then if they win the second map, they'll have no choice on the third. And likely, I would expect CBA to pick something that's really heavy on healing in terms of affix and dungeon choice.
Yeah, so I was sitting in the back with Jack and Sowers, and we were talking about that just a little bit. And one of the things that we have to note with Team No Healer is they did look very rehearsed. This is one of the keys that they knew they were going to have to do. But ultimately now, even if they do win that next map, because they will be able to pick something that they can actually go about with No Healer. But the thing is, when they do get to that third, CBA may have their number. But guys, we're going to jump to a quick break. When we return, we are going to find out if Team No Healer is going to be able to grab a win on their map pick and play out of their mind on the third map. If not, CBA going to run away with it. When we return, we are going to be sending another team home, starting off the day with some elimination matches, folks. Do not go anywhere. The China MDI continues after this.
Cable.
It's not Sunday here yet, but it is Championship Sunday because today we're going to be crowning our champion of this region. Only 2 teams can go to the global LAN. only one team can be the champion of this tournament. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our first weekend of MDI action. We are just getting things started. My name is Rich. I am your host, and you are joining us mid-series that's going to be casted by Salute and Nagora. It is No Healer versus CBA. No Healer has lost their first map. CBA has taken that W. Now, Ted, what do you think the chances really are for No Healer here?
Rich, that was a really close match. You know, I'm just kidding. That was close, though. And
I'm cursed to talk like this in real life. You don't get to... it's a curse.
I understand, Rich Campbell.
At least I'm not bald.
We'll have a discussion about this.
All right, you're in timeout. Nagora, what did you think of that first matchup?
I think it was really close. The problem with the No Healer was that they did have this one wipe, which was devastating for them. I think if they didn't wipe there, then they probably would have won. I mean, it still would have been close, but I think they had a much better chance if there was not this wipe, because the routing is going to be weird and the trash percentage just didn't work out for them.
Yeah, and one of the things that we were all kind of talking about when we were in that break is exactly that. They did look very well rehearsed on that map. They looked like they could easily take it. They had interesting strategies for just about every boss. Like, we could actually go into detail about some of the things that they did, Ted.
Yeah, and, you know, that's exactly what we were talking about during the break, and I just want to build on what she said, is that they were well rehearsed, absolutely. They had only one death more, and, you know, CBA kind of overstepped their boundaries, rather. I think they pulled risky when they really didn't need to, knowing that the other team had to do this kind of riskier strat, and considering the DPS performance they had at the first boss. But the bigger thing is, you know, when they had that wipe, you know, Nagura was saying, oh, well, you can go a different route, and that's very true. But it does kind of offset their trash, offset their CDs. So it kind of forced them to, yes, do the rest of the route. They recovered well. You know, they went the other way around the balcony. They went up to Maiden in the end, but they were stuck in a really kind of not great situation for the trash. They killed Adaman, great, no problem, but then they had to rush upstairs and finish 15% more trash.
All right, well, we see Cathedral of Eternal Night is going to be our map, and I actually want to dive into that a little bit more, Salute. I want to talk about CBA and actually how they could potentially win this. We have also heard that No Healer has locked in Volcanic. That is going to be the affix that they locked in for this map, alongside the other predetermined affixes for Cathedral of Eternal Night. But CBA's win condition here, right? This isn't their map pick. They got the first one. Do they go a more conservative, just try to play and hope No Healer messes up? Or do you think you have to go more aggressive because this is No Healer's map pick?
This is a really weird choice, because Team CBA probably watched No Healer perform yesterday. No Healer did this map yesterday. They did a Cathedral yesterday with that Elemental Shaman, and they just could not keep up with the damage output after the second boss. They just couldn't. Yeah. So this was their pick here on a fortified map. So it's going to be really interesting to see, once again, they get up to the Spider Room with Nalash, with the Spider Queen there, and I don't know how they're going to pull it off. The only difference in the roster this time is they have a Havoc instead of an Elemental Shaman. Granted, the Havoc has a lot more survivability, and part of the issue they were having yesterday in the Cathedral was that Elemental Shaman doing great numbers, but also dying a lot. So we have that extra survivability, but, I mean, there's just Mephistroth, the last boss, there's a lot of damage coming up for them.
This is also going to be, actually having that stun's a little bit easier to use than the cap, and you're also going to have pretty reliable healing, a lot more survivability. We'll have to see, though, if this is going to be enough. We have seen them on this map before, but now we're ready to jump in. If they can't pick up the win here, CBA will close out this series and send No Healer home.
All right, well, here we are. I mean, Nagura, just like I was saying, I'm a bit worried about this map choice by them. We are in a fortified setting again on Cathedral. You know, Sanguine, not the biggest deal in the world, and we do have, you know, another non-threatening affix to them at the end, but still, there's just so much inevitable damage coming up in the dungeon later.
Yeah, I have a bad feeling about this. I feel like No Healer maybe just practiced the first map and just banked on winning it and practiced the third map, and then as they lost, they just picked a map they were practicing with the Shaman. So now they do have a Havoc Demon Hunter instead of, we see a death already here for No Healer, but you can just release and you're gonna be right back. Let's see if they can pull off this pull anyway.
Yeah, but another 5 seconds added to the meter for them there in the end anyway. We already see some kiting coming out of Team No Healer as they drape this huge pull around the corner at the beginning of the dungeon. Of course, that Havoc Demon Hunter has indeed returned. Team CBA in the meantime working on their own pull. We are with Sanguine now as well, so it's really important that you want to move these mobs around. A bit of a heal there on Dual Zac, unfortunately, which has a lot of health. We want to remind everyone at home, of course, that healing from the Sanguine pools on the mobs is percentage health based. So it doesn't really matter how much max HP the mob has. The more they have, the more they're going to heal for in terms of raw number.
Yeah, one thing to note as well is that CBA actually used Bloodlust here on this pull, while No Healer didn't. So maybe No Healer has a bigger pull in mind later on, where they're going to pull Bloodlust, or they save it for the first boss.
It's possible. And if I'm not mistaken, yesterday, did they end up skipping what is typically invis at the bottom? I don't think they did. So they're likely to implement some type of similar strategy to yesterday. We'll have to keep an eye on that. CBA now just finishing up that big pull at the start, starting to head over to some of those dog packs. And of course, that fell Bat Rider that's going to fall down upon them that needs to be interrupted for that AoE fear.
Yeah, we actually see CBA is doing quite a big pull here. I think they pulled 2 packs together. Now they don't have, I assume they don't have cooldowns anymore as they used it for the first pull. So let's see how they're going to pull this off.
Yeah, so there indeed comes the Bat Rider. Now, we do have to talk about these green bubbles for a moment because they are pretty important. Now, they do scale with the damage in the dungeon from the fortified, and they can do a bit of damage while you sit in them. But, of course, the benefit is you gain 50% haste while standing inside. So, you know, actually for a team like No Healer, they're probably pretty beneficial with the amount of leech going on from some of their characters standing in that bubble and just doing that massive AoE damage. Well done by No Healer, of course, with that double imprison to skip some of that time-consuming trash and moving over to that Bat Rider pat along with the next trash.
Yeah, there's some interesting strats they can pull up with Double Demon Hunter, as the CC they can provide does not actually bring you in combat. We see one death actually on this big pull here. The Rogue died.
Yeah, the Rogue died indeed. Unfortunately, he will have to release. Luckily, they're not too far away, but the further they get from the starting point, there's no checkpoint until you kill that first boss. So it's going to get really, really punishing later on if they start having these spot deaths as they work their way upstairs to Agronox, the first boss of the dungeon. In the meantime, CBA working over at the same trash pack right now, just finishing it up. And it's at this point that we see a lot of teams decide to either implement that invis pod or not, or of course, in their case, maybe they do the mass stealth.
Yeah, as they do have a rogue, so mass stealth would probably be more beneficial as the invis pod puts a 10-minute cooldown on your potions, and that is quite a big damage loss. And it also makes the tank not be able to use Sky Step potion, which is very good to pull a lot of trash together.
Yeah, there's not too many points in this dungeon where that Sky Step would work, but when you're DK, it all matters because you just don't have that kind of mobility. One big pull here from CBA, similar to the ones we saw from No Healer. They do end up skipping, of course. We see that in Prison, a sprint from the group, and of course, everybody rushes over during that Rogue mass stealth, and they skip those 2 dangerous packs. We do have a death, unfortunately. Somebody was just a bit slow there. The Warlock does get capped off. Now, this is kind of an interesting situation. He died, and the only person that can heal is their battle res, which they do have available at the moment, so we're gonna have to see what they do. Oh, they actually got the pylon down in the end, so no battle res needed. The Warlock does rise back up, and now they're planning on CCing this 3-pack in the hallway and making their way up the stairs.
Well, yeah, you can see the double imprison here and the sub to skip this trash group. It's interesting to note that the last time around they did this dungeon with the Elemental Shaman instead, they did pull all this trash here, so they actually changed up their strategy, so they are thinking about this.
They actually did kind of mess up their CC there. They had 2 of the mobs CC'd. I'm not sure if there was... Oh, they do have a death immediately from the Rogue. They did have, perhaps it was some kind of line of sight issue, whatever it may have been, but they did kind of need to hop and try to CC that last mob, and they didn't manage to do it, which actually ended up aggroing it, and now they have to deal with this 3-pack, which is obviously... Luckily, it was the Rogue that died, who can stealth right back to them, albeit far away.
Now, it is kind of difficult to pull the trash here. As we can see, those big mobs are doing a Fell Strike, which targets one player and leaves behind a trail of Fell that does damage on impact already. So you need to pre-move, and as it is the stairs and there's not very much space, you might hit some other players with it, and that's why you usually want to pull it back up.
Yeah, and some of this trash, of course, does do that Barb Nature debuff on the tank, a really heavy dot. There is no Dispel, presumably, of course. I don't see the Warlock running one, as the entirety of that dot just ran out on the DK. In the meantime, on the side of CBA, they're working their way up the stairs right now. Where are they right now, actually?
They're right before the...
Oh, there, yeah, okay. So they're just working away over in the meantime. No Healer. Now, as we did mention, it was luckily the Rogue that died earlier, but we mentioned this already. No Healers, like, they're in a really precarious situation. If somebody dies here, they have their battle res down already. If somebody dies, they're in big trouble. They're gonna have to invis pot past the trash. They're gonna have to wait for them to run if it's the Warlock. Otherwise, they'll have to actually, they can't summon, if I'm not mistaken. So it's really, like, this is a lot of damage coming in from this trash here, especially Nagura, because we know these lashers, especially the ones that hook onto you, deal a ton of damage.
Yeah, there's also a lot of interrupts needed here. If one of the casts goes through either the healing or the AoE ability, then that's devastating for the group, especially because there is no healer. One thing to note again, no healer still did not use Bloodlust, so I assume they want to save it for the first boss, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, especially in a fortified setting.
Yes.
I mean, I think they're going to kind of stomp this boss. It shouldn't be too much of an issue. Nonetheless, they are pulling up this last few trash here. Of course, that small tree walker, a particularly dangerous mob, especially on fortified. You want to make sure that you hard CC or displace its AoE stomp. It does a ton of damage. Otherwise, make sure you dodge those roots in the meantime. Team CBA working on the same trash before pulling Agronox. Now, they have to be careful where they kill some of this trash and where they spawn the Sanguine, because most teams like to pull Agronox, the boss right in front of you, towards this kind of fountain area in the middle, so that they have access to the flowers in the fight that spawn near the boss.
Yeah, and they also only have one ranged DPS player who can deal with those flowers once they're away. They do have the option to mass grip the flowers in, stun them, and they weed them down, which they probably will do, but as you said, they have to be careful with those Sanguine pulls because they don't disappear immediately.
Yeah, so they have to be careful where they fight. Now, if I'm not mistaken, yesterday they did actually end up pulling the boss to around where they're standing right now. No healer did. So we'll have to see if they do that again. Now, the flowers do spawn in 2 waves, of course, 2 waves of 5. Each one focuses one of the players in the group, tank and healer included, and should they reach that target, they will explode for a devastating amount of damage. So you do want to make sure that they're CC'd and killed prior to reaching their target.
We see one death here for CBA on the last trash pull before the boss. They should be able to finish it off though and just rest him back up. We see the trash percentage on CBA is actually slightly higher than on no healer.
Yeah, which is weird because no healer actually ended up messing up that skip leading up to the second floor here with Agronox as well. Nonetheless, we do see all the flowers slowed well by the D&D. The Warlock's likely helping out with the ring as well, getting a lot of damage in on them. Now, we have to talk about the Succulent Lasher as well. That is an incredibly dangerous mob. It does heavier melee damage on the tank than Agronox himself. The other major danger in the fight for the group, especially without a healer, is that increasing dot damage on the group that stacks up to 5. We can see currently on the screen that they're at 2.
Yeah, so the Succulent Lasher, you actually want to interrupt the cast with either a grip, but I think they have enough interrupts. They have 3 stuns, and they do have a grip, mass grip as well. We see the player on CBA is actually still dead, so it took them a long time to finish off this group before they managed to rest him up.
Yeah, but I think it was smart by them to make sure not to waste that battle res. They do get that failure detection pylon up. The Demon Hunter comes up right away, and they're also preparing now to pull Agronox. So they're about 8% ahead on trash, but obviously they haven't even pulled Agronox right now, so they have a fair bit of damage to catch up on it in terms of that, and presumably no healer should be outputting a higher amount of DPS on this boss, as they, well, have no healer at the moment, but, you know...
And Bloodlust.
And Bloodlust, exactly. But if Last Dungeon proved, you know, any different, is that Team CBA's single target damage output was really not as bad as you'd think compared to no healers.
Yeah, that is true. So now we're going to see some skips here going on. Usually this trash here left and right is too inefficient to pull, so most teams tend to skip it.
Agronox now at 70% for Team CBA. They've dealt with some of those flowers already, making sure that they keep him near that central kind of fountain area, making sure as a result that the flowers filter in towards them. They can get that slow ahead of time on them and start DPSing them as they come in. In the meantime, no healer now moving upstairs. Now, there are a lot of pulls upstairs. You know, as soon as they get upstairs, they're going to have to deal with imps on either side of the platform and 2 patrolling imps in the middle. Yesterday, some of the teams decided to pull one of the sides. Yesterday, some of the teams decided to just pull the 2 imps padding and go straight into the room and do a big pull. If I'm not mistaken, no healer ended up pulling the right side of imps. On your screen would be the bottom area, and it looks like they're going to maybe do that again. They do have to pull those, actually pulling everything here, so expect perhaps an AoE grip, or they're saving that for the next room. But really important for those book throwers, right, that you want to CC them, and if they do get a book off, stunning is the answer there.
Yeah, you either want to stun it or, well, they don't have grenades as there's no engineering, there's no profession, so they can't do that. But it's also interesting to note that Sanguine is very difficult here because they do have casts that either need to be interrupted, else they don't move. So if you kill them up too early and you have the Sanguine pull on the floor, as they don't have a druid for a punt or something like that, they do have the mass grip, but usually you want to use the mass grip to actually pull the mobs together at the very start, so you can do more AoE damage and not use it afterwards to pull them out of the Sanguine.
Right, Shira, so we're going to see a big pull here, likely with the AoE grip. Oh yeah, there's the AoE grip just at the very end coming in from Team No Healer. So once again, they're going to have to be careful here. They do get that stun off, but they want to make sure the mobs are not CC'd as they're dying because they'll be sitting in Sanguine. Agronox in the meantime for Team CBA. He's going down. He's yelling timber as they finish him off. They'll be going upstairs in just a moment as well. Now, No Healer compared to yesterday, they took these pulls a lot slower. I remember in this room with the Elemental Shaman and the imps outside. Everything's really clean right now. They just have the couple of mobs on the side, and they're going to have to deal Nagura with that mini boss Gazer Axe.
Yeah, they did some decently big pulls, but it was a lot cleaner than last time. We saw the Elemental Shaman go down almost immediately in a lot of those big pulls. This time around, we don't see a lot of deaths here on those pulls, so they're doing really well. The mini-boss, on the other hand, will be kind of difficult as it is fortified and there is no healer, so the AoE after the Blinding Gaze where you have to turn around is going to be quite a lot of damage.
But you know, yesterday they actually dealt quite well with it. Everybody stayed in except for that Shaman who just, you know, got right out of there and outranged the AoE. This time, of course, that second Havoc Demon Hunter, can just stay in there and make sure that they help out with that damage. You want to make sure that you avoid the void zones from Gazerax. They will one-shot you. They're targeted on the primary target, in this case, of course, being the tank. In the meantime, we do see that all of the imps for Team CBA have been pulled in a similar fashion to no healers, but a bit slower. They kind of dealt with one side at a time and then went to the other. Team CBA just going to finish Gazerax right now. Here's that heavy AoE damage that Nagura was just mentioning.
Yeah, so CBA does have 4 less deaths, but they are quite a bit behind now in time. Let's see how big the pulls are going to be that they do in this room.
Obviously not as big. Team No Healer went in and pulled everything except the 2 patrolling book throwers on the side. So they're taking it just a bit slower, which I guess perhaps they just don't have the same CC prowess as does Team No Healer with those double stuns. No Healer now spawning the second boss, getting ready to pull him. Nagura, why don't you tell us a bit about this boss?
Okay, so this boss has 2 important abilities. One is a charge, where he targets one random player. You either have to go behind one of those bookcases to, well, you can also go...
Or inside, as we saw yesterday.
Inside. It also does do a line of sight, the bookcase, so it's much better to actually go inside the bookcase and deal with that this way, so you can still do damage or healing. Then he does an AoE around him where you have to walk out, and if you destroy one of those bookcases, in case you do not have an immunity to deal with the charge, because that works as well, like a Bob or Nemesis, or actually it's called Netherwalk. Yeah.
Those are hard ones to remember.
If they destroy a bookcase, then there's 2 ads that spawn that need to be interrupted. If they're not interrupted, then it will do slows and stuff like that on the group.
They shouldn't have too much trouble, of course, with the double Chaos Nova coming up as the books spawn. But, you know, therefore, Thrashbite did not... they did not kite him in front of the bookcase, so I guess maybe they don't know about that. I'm not sure, I guess, how much the Demon Hunter would really have gained out of that either. Because he's still kind of just waiting there, sitting. It's not a ranged target in the end. Thrashbite now at 33%, 30% for Team No Healer. While in the meantime, I mean, CBA just moving really slow through this floor. I think Gazerax is still patrolling. Yeah, there he is. Gazerax still patrolling somewhere in the background. I mean, they're falling a well bit behind at the moment.
Yeah, they do have a little bit more trash percentage still, but yeah, they're quite a bit slower than the other team as the boss dies here.
But it's not easy to make up some of this trash percentage up top. You know, a lot of teams try to kind of skip some of the spiders on either side here, and there's an easy amount they could do. Now, Team No Healer, this is where they fell apart yesterday. As soon as they got upstairs to the spiders, there's some really nasty up to 5-stack poisons that go out on the tank, a lot of residual damage. If you don't avoid the orb from that casting spider well, that's going to decimate you too. So it's going to be really tough to see. Now, yesterday they also had to deal with explosive, which they don't here, so kudos to them. But we'll see exactly how much that's going to affect. So we'll have to note what they pull upstairs. You really have to kill that Spider Queen boss quickly once you pull her.
Yeah, the last time they actually, I'm not sure if it was intended or not, but they pulled the whole trash on the bridge with the mini-boss as well. And they don't have any DPS who can dispel, obviously they don't have a healer to dispel the poison debuff from the spiders, but they also don't have a DPS who can dispel it, no druid and no windwalker.
And no paladin either.
No
they can usually help out. So they do pull those first 4 spiders there. We do see the stacks going up on the DK now. Of course, DK, the most popular tank by far in terms of self-sustain. Tons of healing coming in from that Death Strike, scaling with damage taken up to a certain limit. Eventually you'll just get one shot and you'll die. But doing well here, getting a bit of that kiting to make sure they get rid of those poison stacks, while of course kiting out of that Sanguine. Now, I would assume here that they're going to probably do 2 pulls. They're going to grab those 2 Enforcers plus that Orb Caster at the same time and then deal with Nalasha, so we'll have to see, and that's indeed what they do. Now, that Orb Caster, we were mentioning, Nagura, is really dangerous because of that frontal Orb Cast.
Yeah, there's an Orb Caster that spawns and goes into a random direction. That only has an X-axis, so you could, in theory, pull it down and have the casters come up. But as there's only 1 Warlock, the melees have to dodge it anyway, so they just chose to tank it upstairs.
No problem for them as they slowly drag it away from the bridge, waiting for that Sanguine to come down in the meantime, and they'll be rearing up to pull Nalasha. Thrashbite just now going down for Team CBA. They will soon have to deal with that massive imp pull where about 90% of those imps actually end up leaving, and they'll just go in and kill the 5 that are required and end up aggroing you. In the meantime, though, No Healer now about to go work on Nalasha. Now, this is really scary for the tank. She starts with 3 little spiders, she spawns another 3 periodically, and she also blinks to one of the players and does a huge frontal. The key there, of course, Nagura, is to make sure that the players aren't too spread so that they can run away from her frontal when that happens.
Yeah, if one of the players would be all the way on the edge and the spider chooses to jump to him, then the frontal cone will cover pretty much the whole room. So it's very, very good that everyone stands inside her, or like pretty close to her, so she doesn't jump too far.
Right, you are. So there's that first blink, no problem. Here come the next 3 spiders right now. There are a total of 6 on the menu for no healer. They're finishing off those first 3, but that poison stack just chunking the DK so hard. Luckily managing to get some heals as they slowly drag away, making sure there's no accidental ticks of that sanguine healing. Well done by them. In the meantime, CBA moving upstairs just across the bridge in the same room that no healer is right now. Nolasha getting her frontal in, not killing anyone though, so they did well to avoid that, although she was in kind of a precarious position. They bottlenecked themselves on the bridge there, but luckily they got away. She does go down. Some spiders are still up. At this point, I would assume the DK tries to kind of bunker up and start kiting these spiders to let those poison stacks drop.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if the Warlock actually runs the slow ring here so the DK has some time to kite, as the spiders only apply the poison debuff to the tank if they get a melee attack off. So if you manage to kite it properly, then it's not going to be a big deal.
Yep, and no problem for them there as they go upstairs. Now, they're only at 91% for the trash right now. I don't think do the spiders she summons aside from the first 3 give percent? We'll see in just a moment. Here's that they don't actually. So they're going to be behind on percent because those last 4 bats upstairs, they don't give enough. They don't they don't give 9%, that's for sure. In the meantime, CBA will likely have enough percentage trash once they finish with Nolasha themselves. No healer now moving upstairs though, and they're getting ready to pull the 3rd boss.
Okay, so we see CBA actually had the Shroud skip here going on. They managed to skip the 3 mobs. In fact, they only skipped 2 of the mobs and pulled 1 mob to the mini-boss. I'm not sure if it was intended or if it was a mistake.
I think it was intended because the Orbcaster does patrol back and forth from the bridge to Nolasha, so they opted to pull the Orbcaster. As you saw, they did grip it in, and they avoided the 2 Enforcers trying to kind of pre-calculate their trash. They should be okay for percentage by the time that
they're actually overkilling.
Yeah, maybe even. But nonetheless, once they kill Mephistroth, they will be done. In the meantime, though, we do see the 3rd boss being pulled from no healer, Domitrax. Now, 2 important points in the fight, 90% and 50% when those portals spawn.
Yeah, so on 90% and 50%, he spawns 2 portals each. Usually what you want to do is keep the boss on 1 portal and have the range go on the other portal, because they do have a cast and you need to kill the portal before the cast goes through. The portals still spawn imps out of the portals on the first 2 that need to be interrupted and killed. If you don't interrupt them, then there's like random cast on random players that does quite a lot of damage, especially on Tyrannical, but it is fortified this time around.
A lot is an understatement. That thing is for like 4 million.
Yeah.
I mean, those little imps pack a punch indeed. At 50% though, the gates that spawn at 50% from Domitrax are a bit more lethal because they spawn those mistresses, and those mistresses do an occasional AoE whirl. In the meantime, unfortunately, Team CBA actually having they did get the pylon down. I did see it from them. So they don't end up having a full wipe, but they did recover it on the other side. Now the problem is, of course, if they wipe upstairs, they have to come back through this in the meantime. Luckily, they do get the reses off, so they'll be getting the reses in just a moment for Team CBA. So they're okay on the other side, but they did just incur another 5 deaths on top of that.
I think it actually might have been intended because they do have enough trash percentage, so maybe they chose to actually wipe on purpose and rest up instead of killing off the trash. Maybe they thought it's more.
Oh, I think it was definitely on purpose. It's just it is another another 25 seconds that they did add to the death meter, but hopefully in their mind that 25 seconds is more beneficial than trying to kill those mobs. Like you're saying, we'll see how that works out for them. Domitrax, as I was mentioning earlier, did indeed summon the 2nd set of portals. They do well to chaos stun those mistresses on the outside when they need to go to the middle and hide, because as I was mentioning, those mistresses do an AoE whirl that will punt players away. And of course, if you get punted out of the shield in the middle when you're trying to hide from the big AoE nuke, well, then you're going to get AoE nuked, and that's just the way it goes. Domitrax, though, should be falling momentarily here for Team No Healer. And I gotta say, Nagura, they struggled with this boss a lot yesterday.
Yes.
And they did quite well here, not a single death.
Yeah, I think they're actually doing very well ever since they had those 5 deaths. It's a long time ago that the last time a player died, so they're having a very, very clean run. And I think they also pulled a little bit saver, especially on the mini-boss right before this boss. And I think the Havoc Demon Hunter is just working much better for them than the Elemental Shaman, yes?
Yeah, I mean, they just have so much survivability and self-healing compared to that Elemental Shaman. The AoE grip, of course, this 4-pack of bats. Once these are eliminated, Mephistroth, the final boss of the dungeon, will be spawning in a moment. I really hope for their sake they realize that they don't have enough trash percentage. Yes, it would be really unfortunate if at the end of the dungeon they start hopping around in circles and they're like, why didn't we win? So hopefully they know that. We'll see. CBA in the meantime has also pulled Domitrax, and they're hitting that 50% threshold where those 2nd set of portals spawn.
Yeah, so it's interesting to note as well that No Healer did use Bloodlust on this boss and not on the last boss. I felt like they should save it for the last boss because he does quite a lot of AoE damage, even if it is fortified, but they don't have a healer, so it's going to be interesting to see how they survive.
Yeah, the pain in the butt for No Healer here is going to be, of course, as well, that those pillars that spawn, the debuffs that spawn pillars, one of them by default is going to spawn on the melee. So you're going to have one of the two Havoc Demon Hunters or the Rogue kind of running out, having to drop it off, running back in, as we see right there. Unfortunately, they spawn it in melee. You know what? Maybe spawning it in melee is actually not the worst thing in the world, because they can all kind of move and not lose too much damage as they go. A lot of damage coming in on the group, but they just have so much self-healing, except for the Rogue. They have so much self-healing to get themselves back up.
Yeah, they're dropping really low. There's also an additional mechanic that does an AoE damage around each player, like a splash damage. And you can see how they're positioning themselves, just like on Maiden earlier in Lower Karasan, so to minimize the damage.
Yeah, I mean, they're doing well. That Rogue barely hanging on, though, unfortunately, at 22% health. Here now we enter the second phase, where the tank typically holds this shield and needs to protect Illidan in the middle of the map from these shadow balls. If they do hit Illidan, it extends the phase by another 2 seconds or 4 seconds or so. And if that happens, it's a ramping AoE damage on the group. As we can see, the players are slowly ticking down. That Havoc's kind of in trouble right now as well, so they need to make sure they eliminate those images.
Yeah, there's also one more ability to note. As you can see, the Demon Hunter dropping really, really low here. Maybe he didn't find a target to leech off of. Then we can also see those windows that are broken. So we can see bats flying through the windows, and they spook green swirlies on the ground that you need to dodge. If you get hit by it, it's quite a lot of damage.
They poop green swirlies indeed. Now, Mephistroth back. They actually did that phase pretty well. That was really scary, though, for a second for that Demon Hunter. Managed to barely hang on a couple times, sub 5%. Mephistroth back up. And nothing else happens in this phase that we haven't already seen at the beginning of the encounter. So knowing that they could survive a phase 1 rotation already, this one's just going to be a bit of a longer phase 1 in the meantime. We are dealing with that backed pack. My God, that's hard. That pack before Mephistroth on Team CBA side, so they haven't even pulled Mephistroth, but we're getting close here. The death counter is only 1 apart. That's 5 seconds. So after Mephistroth, they're gonna have to turn around right away and go kill 3% more of trash.
Oh, we see the Rogue dying here actually, and as he said, they do have 2 battle rests, so it should be okay for them. But as he said, the 3% of trash, and it is quite a long walk from here on out. I feel like they should have, maybe they just didn't see it, because it would have been a lot more beneficial to kill the trash when they were still down there.
I really hope they saw it. The deaths are 7 apiece, so there is no benefit to either team in terms of death count for those extra 5 seconds. No healer about to finish Mephistroth. Well done by them again. Only 1 death on the Rogue, which not too surprising. The Rogue just doesn't have that kind of same self-heal capability. In the meantime, tons of damage coming out from the Rogue on Team CBA side. They're dealing with that first round of phase 1 for Mephistroth as well. We see Team No Healer rushing as quickly as they can down the stairs to make sure they pull those last couple of mobs. The DK going off the side decides doesn't want to live in this world anymore, and they're desperately looking for whatever they can get their hands on to try and finish this map. In the meantime, Mephistroth about to enter the first transition phase for Team CBA.
So it's only 3% that they're missing. They should be able to find those 3% before CBA actually finishes off the boss, but you never know. They're still looking.
They are still looking. I mean, they cleared everything up to here, so they have to go almost all the way back to Agronox at the beginning of the dungeon. Finally, they see some trash. Oh, everyone's so happy now.
I hope they're not pulling too much here, because they might end up wiping here, because there's some mobs here that need to be interrupted, and if they're not, then they might wipe.
Yep, so they do kill those 2 fulminating lashes right away, so they don't explode on the group. So now it's just a matter of who's going to win this first. CBA, are they going to be able to kill Mephistroth first, or are these trash mobs going to die in just a moment for Team No Healer? It looks like I'm on the Team No Healer train in terms of them tying up the series in just a moment. One of them drop. Once that Temptress drops, they will be able to clutch it and tie the series at 1 apiece. Rich Campbell.
No, I mean, like, there's just this mad dash at the end to actually find something to kill. And, you know, you see that No Healer with just that 1 difference in their actual comp. This is definitely something that was one of their, an ace in the hole, if you will. They're very well rehearsed on it, even with that mistake. That mistake, though, could have cost them, Ted.
That was really sloppy.
Yes.
That was not well planned.
Everything else was well planned, and then you miss 1 impact or something like that, and then all of a sudden you're just left with not enough trash.
It was just clearly not intended. They probably were already at, let's say, the spider pack, and they're like, uh-oh, we didn't pull enough trash here, but it worked out for them. And like you said, Rich, I mean, really, really clean from them, aside for that mistake. You know, a couple spot deaths here and there. It's to be expected, especially on the heavy AoE damage for the Rogue, not as much survivability, but totally different team. There is one thing also that worked in their advantage: no explosives.
Yes.
That helps a lot for them. It doesn't distract them from just nuking these packs down as quickly as they can.
You know, the other thing, though, that we really do need to think about is how much stronger they really do look when they're not trying to move out of their depth, in a sense, and actually run with a healer. But we already mentioned how hard this is going to be for No Healer, because now CBA in the final dungeon of this series will have the pick. Is that going to be enough for CBA to take this one, or will no healer be able to do it with one of the craziest comps that we have seen in this tournament? We will find out after this quick break. When we return, one of these teams will get eliminated. One will stay to fight in that lower portion of the bracket. Find out who's going to do it when we return. Welcome back, folks. It's time to find out if we are going to see the only team in this tournament that's been running with no healer progress further, or if they will be sent home by CBA. My name is Rich, and I'm your host, and I'm joined on the desk by a bald man and Nagora. Guys, we were talking quite a bit about how important it really was. A handsome bald man and Nagora. Sorry there.
So I'm not handsome.
Stunning gent here. But we were talking about how important it really was for no healer to be able to win that first map, because now CBA is going to have the map pick in the dungeon that's going to decide it all. And Ted, they did a pretty good job with their map pick.
Yeah, they practiced. I was really worried after what happened yesterday, but we're going to Blackrock Hold, Rich, and this is going to be scary because Blackrock Hold by default comes with Grievous. So I mean, like, if I'm counter picking against Team No Heal right now, I'm just going to throw as many affixes as I can that require healing, bursting, Grievous, whatever it may be.
We were talking, Nagora, at length during break about the Rogue in particular. We talked about in Karazhan what they even had to do to keep the Rogue alive, right? On Morose, they're just chain vanish to actually like pre-vanish to avoid that mechanic, and then you have those defensive cooldowns from the Demon Hunters actually utilized. It's darkness into darkness, and finally they get Morose down. But this Rogue he looks like he's going to be toast throughout this dungeon.
For sure. I feel like Demon Hunters might be able to heal through some of these affixes, but it is going to be super difficult, especially because it's two healing affixes. Not just Grievous, it's also bursting on top of it. So those big pulls that we saw in the other dungeons that they're doing, they're probably not going to be able to pull that off anymore, because how are you going to heal through it? They do have double darkness, though, to deal with some of those big pulls. So if they time the darkness correctly, they might be able to do some very big pulls and then just have the darkness deal with the bursting, but then there's still Grievous to deal with.
They're going to have to deal with some pre-immuning for the big pulls, you know, with some of the cloak play for the bursting and the nether walks, and of course pre-AMS. Good luck, Warlock. I mean, it's a Warlock, but you know. Warlock.
Okay, so here's the deal. You know, the Demon Hunters, they're not even going to have an immunity, right? They're not actually probably going to run Netherwalk, because they're probably going to run Soul Rending, so they can actually just heal off their eye beams. I'm assuming.
I don't know.
I mean, there's no other way to keep consistent healing up, in my opinion. I feel like that's probably most likely the route that they go for. You run tier 21, you're going to keep up your haste, and you throw on that little eye bandana thing, and you press eye beam. That's, if you guys want to be a good Demon Hunter, that's how you do it. I promise. So they're going to run in there. They're just going to keep hitting that eye beam. They're going to be able to actually keep into their meta form. They're going to be able to get that healing, but that means they're not going to have an immunity. That should be fine. That's a way to actually get out of Grievous, though. Warlocks, you know, you stop casting Seed of Corruption for a second to just drain soul.
I'm not really worried about Grievous for anybody but the Rogue, quite frankly.
Exactly.
I'm worried about the bursting, because just like Nagura said, I mean, there's going to be huge pulls. Think about the spiders going up the stairs after the first boss. Think about some of the pulls we saw for, you know, with the Commander Shamalama Ding Dong leading up to the second boss, Ilisana. The Blade Lord packs upstairs. There's tons of huge pulls that these teams did to gain a ton of time that it's going to be tricky for them to figure out.
And as we jump into the map here, that is important to be thinking about, because Ted, you kind of hit it right on the head. It has been their best strategy to get these massive pulls and basically try to kill it in 2 stuns. That's really been their big strategy. And here, you can't just go for those all-in kills because of the bursting. But guys, this is the first match of the day. It is an elimination match. Who is going to come out on top? Will it be CBA, or will it be Team No Healer?
Right, you are it. All right, Nagura. So we've seen this a lot yesterday as well. I mean, this is just, these affixes are pure counter Team No Healer. Both teams, of course, right away opting to skip that trash leading up to the first boss, which is the most just standard things we see on live servers, on tournament realms, all over the place. Do well to get over to the other side. No boo-boos, no mistakes there. And we're going to jump right into this first boss. Can you tell us a bit about it?
Yeah, so the first boss has 2 normal abilities in his normal phase at the very start, where he throws a scythe at one player that just needs to be dodged. If you get hit by it, then you get knocked back, get a little bit of damage. Then there's one more debuff that gets applied to one player that spawns swirlies around you. It explodes after a couple of seconds. If you do get hit by it, then you do get feared and you take a lot of
excuse me, Nagura, there's actually 3 abilities, right?
I'm
Tanks
sorry.
also have to deal with some
I
things.
forgot about
There's a huge
tanks,
frontal, you know, next time I'm going to turn that frontal right into you, and we'll see how that works out.
Then after some time, he actually goes into the middle and casts, and he pretty much does nothing. He channels an ability in the middle, does nothing, and then we have spirits spawn all on the sides of the room. They come closer and closer to the boss. They do need to be killed. If they reach the boss, for each spirit that does reach the boss, he gets a buff that increases his damage done, and once he gets out of this phase, he does a huge explosion in AoE, and obviously you do not want that any of those spirits reach the boss, because the more damage it does, you're most likely going to kill if you don't have an immunity.
Yeah, if I'm not you're absolutely right. If I'm not mistaken, the spirit increases by 100% damage per spirit absorbed for that explosion. Now, most teams do try to kind of hold one of the spirits away from the boss to make sure that they have as much uptime of DPS without the boss having to deal with any mechanics. At 15% though, once he enters the second phase, as we can see with Team No Healer in a moment, and of course CBA just enters it, at 15% he will by default do that explosion and go back in the first phase. But if you manage to kind of wait until that point, well, some of these spirits getting really close here for Team CBA, managed to AoE grip it away. In the meantime, Team No Healer, some of them rounding on in as well, do well to stun them and AoE grip them away. As we do see, they're trying to kind of hold slows with that 70% slow D&D on those mobs to get that free DPS uptime on the boss till 15%.
Yeah, one thing we kind of forgot about is, the mage just died. I think he forgot to press his ice block right there. But they do have a mage, so as
they had a mage.
Exactly. So yesterday we saw an arcane mage. He's playing fire though. So I wonder if they're gonna utilize their spell seal from their arcanist or not.
Yeah, I mean, any mage can do it. All you need is that spell steal. So we'll have to see if they do that, and if the fire can pump out as much damage. The fire should be likely a bit better on the AoE, I would guess, versus the arcane. But we'll see how much that boss damage difference. Because I mean, that arcane mage was getting 15 to 20 mil burst on those two bosses throughout the dungeon. Of course, Team No Hero not having that mage, so a bit of a disadvantage to them. But they have bigger things to worry about later in the dungeon with these affixes than just that mage gameplay.
Yeah, so we see the bosses actually die pretty much at the same time, which again, we talked about earlier already. It's kind of weird as they don't have a healer and you don't really need any healing, so I don't think that any of the DPS had to run any defensive legendaries or any defensive items because, there's no damage going on other than the big AoE, which you can just immune.
You know, the big difference here is that Holy Paladin pumped out a fair bit of damage, 1.28 mil over that boss period, and their tank actually ended up out DPSing the other tank by, close to 40%. So, with those powers combined, they actually almost equaled up to the Warlock / Blood DK DPS for Team No Healer. So that's where they're kind of making up a lot of that single target damage, which does not bode well for Team No Healer.
Yeah, so now both teams have to wait a little bit. There's not much you can do during this RP because the trash that they skipped earlier is quite nasty trash and you don't really want to deal with it. So both teams just opt to wait here and wait for the RP to be over.
Now this is where things are going to get scary with this bursting affix. There's a lot of small spiders leading up the stairs here. I wouldn't be surprised. Team No Hero is going to do one of two things. They're either going to pull everything pre-immune and just get it over with, or they're going to have to baby step pull. Obviously, we're seeing option one come in here from Team No Healer as they move up the stairs all the way to that big spider, nuke everything down. Everybody dealing with those massive amount of bursting stacks in the meantime. The Warlock opting to just hang back, as we discussed earlier. The Warlock would get in trouble for some of those high bursting stacks. The tank actually going down in the end while those Havoc Demon Hunters managed to survive, but not anymore because the tank is dead. That spider manages to melee both of them and finish them off. The Rogue here should head back down the stairs immediately and get back to the rest of the team as to not allow that spider to reset.
Yeah, so one thing to note here as well is that yesterday when No Healer played this dungeon, as it was the first dungeon in the second round upper bracket, they played with that Resto Shaman because they felt like it's too much to deal with 4 DPS. Now we see one death here at CBA coming out of this big pool that they did there.
It's that poor mage again. He did just proc the Cauterize earlier and then got finished off shortly after. Team No Healer in the meantime moving back up. They do have those 3 deaths on the board from the tank and the 2 Havoc Demon Hunters, but nonetheless, with the kind of damage that was going on from that bursting earlier, they actually managed to deal with it quite well. Grievous taking its toll though, unfortunately, on that Warlock, trying to scramble up and get past that 90% health threshold to make sure that 5 stack goes away. Does well to do so. Now, the Trash Nagura in this hallway that both teams are currently on is a huge pain in the butt. You have the knife stands from the scouts doing tons of damage, needs to be hard CC'd, displaced, blinded, whatever. You have, of course, these champions that do their frontal. If that manages to cast, you have that Rallying Cry, increasing the health of all their nearby buddies for 50% of their current HP. And then you have the archers just shooting a bunch of random people.
Yeah, the archers are definitely going to be a problem for no healer, as they do have 3 melee which need to be in range to deal damage. The warlock can choose to outrange, which he probably shouldn't do because the shoots are gonna target all the melee if he outranges it. But yeah, if one melee gets targeted a couple of times in a row by shoot.
Oh no!
Oh, wow.
The backfire from CBA,
Oh, no.
MCing that Arcanist in the meantime, letting go of that MC. The poor DK getting absolutely obliterated by the Arcanist as soon as they let the cast go off. They are trying to kind of hold on to it and try that tactic that we saw yesterday with that Arcane Mage, but it's going to buy them a little bit of time. That DK, of course, not the fastest tank in the world, will have to get back up and tank that Arcanist getting ready with the spell seal stacks.
Yeah, this is actually going to cost him a lot of time, as the mage probably was already stacking his buffs up, and now they have to either do it all over again, or they need to go without the buff. So this is going to cost him quite a bit.
Yeah, so here we go. So that's 2 stacks. We're about to have the 3rd from the Arcane Blast in just a moment. There's 3. They grip it immediately. Here's the 4th in a moment, and we should be presuming 4th. They're going, okay, so they get 4 stacks on the Mage. Mage is drinking back up real quick, and we should presumably see a massive amount of damage coming in. I would assume they pull the whole haul here in just a moment for CBA. In the meantime, of course, Team No Healer still working to chew through this trash. One of the Havoc Demon Hunters just so low, hanging on at 20%, 17%, 8%, barely dipping around, cannot get out of that Grievous situation. Immediately, they drop the Feast and start eating up.
Yeah, so one good thing about this about Grievous is as soon as you get out of combat, you can put down those feasts and they will regen your HP immediately. So now we see CBA actually doing a very, very big pull as the mage stacked up his stacks. You can see the damage that the mage is pulling off. It's crazy.
Yeah, you know what? It's not as big as I would have thought.
Well, the mobs are dead. So.
Yeah, okay. I wanted to see some bigger numbers, but we'll have to see. Of course, now they're waiting for Commander Shamalama Ding Dong to come down. Here they are indeed. The mage should still have that buff, as we saw yesterday with the Arcane Mage left over, absolutely crushing these mobs. In the meantime, we do see them just chunking down. The mage takes a pretty big hit there, presumably from, actually maybe even a double cast from the archers, dips quite low. In the meantime, No Healer, just kind of safely chewing through everything. They've only had 4 deaths, 3 of those being in that Spider Hall, which is particularly daunting for them with these affixes.
Yeah, I feel like they can't do super big pulls because the longer they are in combat, the longer they will have this Grievous stacking on them, except of course the Demon Hunters who can heal them up immediately.
Yeah, the Fire Mage didn't actually end up pulling out as much damage as the Arcane Mage on this pull particularly. I actually ended up watching a clip of it when I went home because it was just so beautiful. And I mean, these mobs just chunked down from that multi-arcane barrage from the Arcane Mage earlier. Nonetheless, obviously, the Mage had absolutely no problem handling this pack, but they were a bit slower than the counterpart that we saw yesterday with this trick with the Arcane Blast spell stealing. Nonetheless, now that they have killed this pack, they do have access to start moving up the stairs towards Ilisana, the second boss of the dungeon. They will have to deal with one more trash pack consisting of 1 champion and 2 archers.
Yeah, so I'm actually still quite impressed by No Healer to deal with these affixes and this dungeon with No Healer. It's actually quite impressive that they only have 4 deaths at this point. Because as I said earlier, those trash packs are there. Oh, okay, we see the rogue dying here.
You spoke too soon.
It was too much. I jinxed it. Okay, so but it is very difficult to survive here, especially for melee with all those all this damage coming out. And if you miss interrupts or you miss a knock or a grip or something, then it's gonna be so much damage on the whole group.
They have to drop so many feasts after every pack. Thank God these are not live servers and they don't have to waste all the gold on the feast. CBA dealing with this last pack before Ilisana. Should be no problem for them. Of course, the champion going down first, as that is probably the most annoying mob to deal with in terms of buffing the rest of the group because of that 50% HP buff. Constantly having to babysit it, disorient it, displace it, and stun it. You can't soft interrupt, with a kick or whatever it may be on that champion's frontal. They do finish up the pack and they'll be moving up the stairs in just a moment. In the meantime, Team No Healer just catching up as well. But another death, and this is really going to be the problem with the team for the rest of this dungeon, is really that they're just going to keep losing 1-2 guys at a time. Not only will that add those 5-second death penalties, but it's just going to slow them down. They got to release, they got to run back. You're finishing the pack with 4 DPS. Nonetheless, we do see the building up here again one more time from that Arcanist, and they're going to pull Ilisana, the second boss. Why don't you tell us about that, Nagura?
Okay, so this boss is going to be quite difficult for a No Healer team, as it is tyrannical, and this boss has quite a few mechanics that do deal a lot of damage to the group. One of them is a glaive that gets thrown to a random player that does physical damage. It is touchable, but as it is only targeted on range, the warlock will have to deal with that one, and he will get continuously thrown with this glaive. Then one more ability she does is a Fell Rush that that targets 3 different players. Now, most people do a strat where you form a triangle around the boss, and as soon as she starts rushing, you move out together at the same time, so you don't get hit by the blazing trail on the ground.
And here we go with the mage with all those spell seal stacks doing absolutely enormous amount of burst damage, peaking at 23 mil, still going 24, 25. Looks like they've kind of capped off just a bit. Ilisana's health absolutely getting obliterated, going down already towards that 50% mark. Yeah, okay, that was quite a bit of damage. I keep comparing it to my hero, the Arcane Mage, yesterday, who just seemed to cap out just a bit higher. Nonetheless, half of the boss's health already gone, nowhere near either that transition phase that Naguru was mentioning earlier. But they do have to now deal with some of the mechanics at this point. Of course, the Mage's damage and buff has likely fallen off at this point. We do see the Vanguard come in. We do see that second Arcanist spawn. Now, that Arcanist, much like the one that they're kind of tagging along with them, does cast the same Arcane Blitzes, and they need to be interrupted because that same mob gains the same damage buff and will end up one-shotting some of those players.
Yeah, we actually see here no healer has 2 deaths. This probably means it's going to be a full wipe. We see the rogue dying as well. As I said earlier, this is a tyrannical boss with bursting and grievous, and it's just so much damage to deal with without the healer, and yeah, we see a full wipe here. It's going to cost them a lot because they use Bloodlust as well.
Those brutal glaives alone are a huge dot, and then on top of it, you add the grievous stacks with it. I mean, I don't know if they're going to be able to kill this boss. I'm not going to lie. We'll have to see. But they are running back. They did have that kind of cat MC'd, which the DKs in groups often do because they're just extremely dangerous. They jump on the group, AoE the area, and do a huge bleed on them. Likely we'll see them kind of cat-napping, if you will, the cat upstairs again, bringing it around to the boss. In the meantime, of course, Ilisana back to her first phase again, casting this Fell Rush, 20% for Team CBA.
Yeah, so I don't think they're gonna have a problem finishing off this boss. They don't have they have 3 deaths so far, which is actually kind of impressive because usually in Black Recall there's a lot of things that can go wrong. You can lose a player here and there, especially with those kind of affixes. So they're having a pretty clean run so far.
Yeah, not bad, and you're right, especially the trash. I mean, the trash they just dealt with just has so much residual damage on the surrounding party members, so pretty clean from them. Ilisana going down in just a moment, 2% now left. It is worth noting as well that this is now a checkpoint for them. The mage getting quite low there, barely getting out of his grievous stack. Does proc Cauterize, already at the 4 stack mark, about to stack to 5 in a moment. They all sit down for a quick meal, making sure they help the healer, the Holy Paladin, out of those stacks. Now, Cauterize is not available for the mage. They are, if I'm not mistaken, yes, the Arcanist is still with them, marked with that triangle, I think. Actually, no, they're not marked. They hate him. They're going up the stairs now for the boulders, where I presume we're going to see another Sky Step potion pull from the Blood DK with all of those small the small potion addicts, along with, of course, the 3 big Blade Lords.
Yeah, so if they pull the whole room, I'm not sure if they're going to buff up the mage here beforehand or if they're going to do a small pull before they go, because pulling the whole room is quite a big risk, especially with bursting and grievous going on at the same time, and they don't have a Warlock to slow them up. Maybe they have another way to slow them, but a Warlock is very good here as the tank needs to kite at some point.
Well, it's just that D&D, right? They're going to pull everything, drop that in D&D, get that 70% slow, but of course that only has a 10-second uptime along with a 15-second cooldown unless they're getting those random auto-attack procs on mobs, which of course he won't be because he won't be anywhere near those mobs. So, but it looks like they're going for it. They're pulling everything. The DK is probably going to return with everything, drop a slow, and the mage is just going to do some, hopefully, I would assume, huge damage here in just a moment.
Okay, so we see no healer is still on the same boss this time around. It goes a little bit better than last time, but they seem to have a lot of trouble.
I think their Warlock just went down, if I'm not mistaken.
They had to rest him.
Yeah, they used to use that battle res as we see those little gravestones there representing a player death in the meantime. Now, the Blade Lord, the pull goes actually quite well. A lot of damage coming up from the Havoc Demon Hunter. So, but, you know, they still have all those grievous stacks ticking now, and these Blade Lords deal a lot of damage to the tank. There is, of course, this Brutal Assault is the main thing that they need to watch out for. It does a cast, and once the cast finishes, it will then channel huge hits on the tank. It's very advisable to interrupt it once the channel starts, because if you interrupt it during the cast of Brutal Assault, they'll just recast it right after.
Exactly. So we see no healer is getting closer and closer to this kill. They have 1 battle res left. We can see the Warlock is getting so much damage from this. He actually died again. As I said earlier, the Brutal Glaive only targets ranged players, and if you already have a Brutal Glaive on you, the boss doesn't care and just gives you another one. And as it does initial damage, it does a lot of damage if you already have one on you. And we saw him die just because of that. And
they opt to immediately use the battle res on the Warlock. Now, the tank kind of screwed up too as well. Missed that active mitigation check on the Vengeful Shear. As you can see, that debuff, the tank getting absolutely chunked. Not maybe the best idea to get the Warlock up. As soon as he got up, he got Brutal Glaive right away, started ticking down. And of course, we see the Havoc Demon Hunter go down. I think this is going to be another full team team wipe in just a moment. They only have the Rogue and one of the Havocs alive, and of course we also still have the tank. Luckily that Vengeful Shear debuff is now disappeared, but you gotta make sure you get your active mitigation up, otherwise you take that 30-second debuff where you take 100% increased damage, and that's a lot for this tyrannical boss, especially without a healer in the meantime. Of course, Team CBA moving up rapidly past all of those boulders, making sure they don't get pancaked in the meantime, and I'm gonna be interested to see exactly how they deal with this gauntlet coming up.
Yeah, yesterday we saw a couple of different pulls. I don't think we saw any group pull the whole gauntlet all the way up to the boss. We saw some strats where they stopped in the middle, just cleared some things off, and then went into the boss room.
Actually, a lot of the groups, you're right, they didn't go to the boss room, but they went in front of the stairwell leading to the third boss, but what they did is they ended up grabbing the last two Dominators as well and grouping all 6 Dominators in that area, because it allowed for them to pull some of those extra bats into the boss room with them without having to deal with the Dominators, and then, you know, buffing that rogue damage immensely for single target. In the meantime, things are looking really, really sticky here for Ilisana, and we also have a death coming up from Team CBA. Battle Res goes up immediately on the Havoc, and as we said earlier, they are DPSing those Dominators in the exact same location. Another full team wipe from Team No Heal. This is going to be really tough for them to get by. I mean, I just don't think they are. We'll have to see, and even if they do, they're so behind at this point. There's a 14 death differential, 70 seconds on the board for Team No Healer. Team CBA, although not the cleanest run in the world either, but I mean, they're just kind of chiseling through it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, they had some very good pulls. They only have 5 deaths. As I said, for Black Recall, that's not that much. They have a very clean run. They are abusing the mage buff, of course, and they're doing very well with it. But yeah, as I said, without a healer, and that probably was the reason why they actually had to choose to play with the Shaman yesterday, because this boss is just devastating for this comp.
You call it cheesing, I call it clever use of game mechanics, working out excellent, of course, for that mage. They finish everything off. Likely, they will allow the mage to once again do a bit of spell stealing here prior to pulling Smash Spite.
Yeah, so this boss has a couple of important abilities that you need to note. One of them is a charge that targets one random player, but you can intercept it by just walking in between the player and the boss. It does a lot of damage to the player that gets hit, and also applies a debuff to you that increases the damage taken by this charge. So what you want to do is either have someone with a lot of cooldowns. Usually the tank takes a couple of them, but at some point he will take too much damage and runs out of defensive cooldowns. So other players like rogues or classes with immunities can take the charge instead.
So I would expect that we don't see the boss live too long here. Of course, we do have the mage representing about 4 DPS in one player. In the meantime, Team No Healer, once again for the 3rd time, rearing up to try and pull Ilisana and get her down. Probably one of the roughest bosses they'll have to deal with this in this dungeon without the healer and with the affixes that currently exist. The mage just skyrocketing above the rogue, who's holding his own too, by the way. I mean, 6 million is not a bad amount of damage. Huge damage coming up on the group. We see that cauterize proc right away. Keep in mind, of course, this is tyrannical, so these bosses are doing a lot of damage with that AoE hit, but Smash Spite already less than 40% now. I mean, this is insane.
It's actually a little bit greedy by the mage, as we saw him proc his cauterize with prolonged power, so maybe he might actually not survive later AoEs, unless the boss dies before that, of course.
Yeah, that's true, so they're gonna have to consider this. Wouldn't be surprised to see something like, okay, so he's okay there. Wouldn't be shocked to see something like a Blessing of Sacrifice come out of the Holy Paladin, make sure that their super mage does not get deleted there. The mage's buff is probably gone at this point, I'm sure, but who cares? The boss is already at 20%, so really shouldn't be a big deal. Of course, real estate on this boss usually becomes a bit of an issue at those higher tyrannical levels, but no problem again. We unfortunately see that Warlock just going down. The Brutal Glaive is just so punishing on this boss, and without a healer plus Grievous, I mean, Warlock or not, you're just not healing through that amount of damage taking on you.
Yeah, it's just so much for the Warlock to deal with. All the Glaives, the Grievous, and he might get a Fell Rush too, and then he has to kite the beam in the intermission phase as well. There's just, all the abilities are on the Warlock, and without the healer, it's just so hard to handle, even if they have a lot of self-healing. It's just too much.
Right, you are. Smash Spite now at 6% for Team CBA. In a moment will be going down, and then they'll be rearing up to pull what I would assume to be the entire stairwell leading up to Dentalian Axe, which is the last boss of the dungeon. In just a moment, the mage ends up going down, but you know what? He's done his due diligence. Who cares? He ended up doing about 80% of the boss damage there. So they do move over, and I would assume here we're going to see. Now, that was fortunate too. It was good timing. He died just at the very end, and we do know that once that boss dies, you do get another checkpoint. Unfortunately, another death going down for Team No Healer.
I think they're going to have another full wipe here. They do have one rest, but if they rest a while, like he's just going to die again. The boss is still very high HP, so I assume they're just going to have a full group rival. I think they're just not able to kill this boss at all.
I think at this point they realize what's going on.
Yes.
They're just having a good time, I'm sure, I hope. Team CBA now moving up to the stairs, I would assume. Sky Step in just a moment. Yeah, it looks like they're pulling everything to the top. They missed a couple of mobs up there that are just hanging out, so a bit of time lost there, unfortunately. Now they finally go up. We see the DK go up and grab the remaining 2 mobs. Now we do have Lancers here, and we do have the Swordsmen. The Lancers, of course, casting that Raven's Dive. Big gray swirly on the ground. You want to make sure you move out of that. Does a 5-second stun. Does not DR either, so you can get caught in a huge chain of stun there. And finally, we have that coup de grace from the Swordsman that does huge tank damage too.
Yeah, I feel like they should maybe try to go a little bit less risky at this point, because I'm pretty sure someone told them that the other team is wiping on the same boss over and over, so they don't have to take any huge risks. They can do whatever they want, and they're probably gonna be safe as long as they finish the boss without any wipes.
I mean, they CBA taking it slow. They just want to make sure that they finish this dungeon hard and cap off and keep their tournament health alive. Havoc Demon Hunter once again going down for Team No Healer. I mean, Illisan is just having an absolute field day right now.
I mean, maybe the Blood DK can just solo the boss for the next 2 hours.
Not if he keeps missing his active mitigation check, of course, but we'll have to see. Purgatory, of course, already procced at this point. We're going to have to report a crime to the police for Illisana and all those murders going on Team No Healer. In the meantime, Team CBA looking to finish off the last of the trash. Arcanist is still with them. Now, we did see a couple of scary moments with this tactic, keeping the Arcanist during the boss. It did kind of break loose at the very end during the Dentalian Axe phase and, you know, just started kind of wreaking havoc on the party. So they have to make sure they keep that in check during the fight.
Yeah, it's also very good to note that they do have 99% enemy forces, so once they kill this Arcanist, they actually have perfect percentage, and it's nice to see that teams are planning out their routes perfectly so they don't overkill any trash.
And at this point, you know, I wish my good buddy Rich was here, but Team No Healer has been full screened at this point. CBA up on the board completely. They have pulled, they're actually getting ready to pull a Kurtalos, which is the first phase of this Dentalian Axe encounter coming up. He's probably just going to melt. The mage is just going to do away with him during the Arcanist buff. Ravencrest is going to go away, and then they have that huge RP. Now, Nagura, there is that extremely vulnerable part of this fight during the especially with Tyrannical, before the players get the buff that we talk about, and he does that AoE Shadow Bolt volley.
Exactly. So there's one buff that gets applied to the whole group in the second phase after a while that increases everyone's HP, everyone's damage, and everyone's healing. Now, the very first Shadow Bolt that the boss does, which is an AoE that hits the whole group, you don't actually have the buff yet. So that means you probably have to use some sort of personal cooldowns or immunities, as it is Tyrannical, and it is at 23 dungeons, so the Shadow Bolt is going to do quite a lot of damage.
Everyone should be okay except for the mage, as long as they don't forget to kind of pre-ice block like we saw in that first boss. Should be okay. And if they do die, they got to take that battle res right away. Rogue proccing the cheat death there. They should be all right here in just a moment. We do see, of course, that ice block come up from the mage as we do see the debuff from it. Everybody is about to get their buff. They do indeed. Now, I wonder if, you know, you could get pretty fancy with this Arcanist thing. I mean, you can drop the Arcanist to try and spell steal buffs while you're doing that kiting strategy during Dreadlord's Guile, and they go away. Is it worth it? Probably not, unless you're really racing against the clock. But I mean, this is Tyrannical. There's a lot of health on that mob. So imagine.
You're gonna run out of mana.
Yeah, true. Yeah, very true. Unless you time it well with an Evocate. Oh, but then you'd have to still dump your entire mana pool. You're absolutely right. Nonetheless, we do see the Arcanist still MC'd here. You do notice, of course, that the team's at 99%, but that last 1% will be from that Arcanist.
Okay, so there's one other ability that you need to know in this boss fight, which is a swarm that gets casted on a random player. Can also be the tank, which is obviously the best target for the group, as it does stun the target that it's on, and it does a lot of damage, especially coupled with the Shadow Bolt that happens throughout the fight. Oh, the rogue actually dropped really
LOH, that was a good LOH.
Yeah, that was a nice reaction time there by the healer.
Yeah, so that lay on hands coming, of course, topping off that rogue. And, you know, these Grievous stacks can get away really quickly, especially with this kind of play on the 300% health buff and healing. I mean, they start to take pretty out of control. That Stinging Swarm, though, is really, really dangerous in Tyrannical setting on top of all that dot. So you want to make sure you kill that immediately. A bit of RNG involved, of course. It could go on the tank, which is obviously the most beneficial, but not always the case. Did they solve the Arc? Yeah, no, so they actually have finished off the Arcanist at this point, at that 100%, and now it's just theirs to take.
Yeah, you can see the healer actually has a lot of things to do, as he barely does any damage. You can see if healers don't do damage, that means they're probably healing, because of course they're not going to stand there and do nothing at all. So if there's nothing to heal, then they're going to do damage.
Yeah, so indeed, I mean, there's a lot of damage on this fight. You know, this fight scales pretty crazy. You know, it's kind of a joke at some of the lower key levels, not too bad, especially once you outgear it. But the combination of that Grievous plus the Stinging Swarm can make things get pretty out of control pretty quickly, especially with that Shadow Bolt starting to get those Grievous stacks rolling into a Stinging Swarm. I think this is the last kind of transition phase we'll see here. They should be able to hopefully finish off their remaining 30%. But I mean, you know, at this point, Nagura, I mean, you know, I would say I'm fairly confident that CBA is going to win this map, but they did their duty, and I'm sure Rich is gonna, you know, talk about this too, but they just perfectly counterpicked this map.
Yeah, they did a they made a very good choice in picking this dungeon and the affix too. And I mean, we can't disregard their performance either, because they were pretty fast and they only had 6 steps, so they had a pretty clean performance here in this dungeon. Yeah,
some Dentalian Axe now going to the last single digit of percents. We do see Team No Healer pop up to say hello one last time, as this is the last time we will likely see them in this tournament. CBA finally downing Dentalian Axe and finishing it off and taking the series 2-1.
The death count for No Healer there went from voting age to drinking age, and if we let this keep going, it would probably get to retirement age soon. But ultimately, like you said, Sloot, it all comes down to that map pick. A beautiful map pick from CBA is going to keep them in this tournament and send Team No Healer packing. Now, the thing is you wanted to cheer for No Healer, right? You wanted to see them go forward, but this is just, it's a very fragile strategy, because, Nagora, if they don't win map 1, they get put in this situation time and time again.
That's the problem. They do need to win map 1, so they can lose the second pick. It doesn't really matter if they get counter-picked on the second pick, and then they can choose map 3 again, and then they can actually choose affixes that they're good at, right? But it's just too difficult to get counter-picked.
Yeah, and the thing is, too, is we haven't even hit the highest difficulty of keys that we're actually going to see in the tournament. So then it becomes a question, is a strategy like this even possible on the blind, even when you get that potential counter pick?
I mean, eventually the numbers just aren't going to add up. I mean, even if on Illusana we didn't have that Grievous, you know, we didn't have the bursting on the trash, eventually things are just going to hit you so hard and roll you that you're just not going to be able to self-heal enough. You're going to have to start speccing and building defensive legendaries, etc., and you're just not going to have the damage output needed.
Now the question is CBA, obviously congratulations to them. They are still going to be moving through this loser's bracket. How strong do you think that they actually are going to be on a team? Because we know with this double elimination tournament, the competition that actually does drop down now is going to get more and more difficult. Yeah,
I mean, there was sloppiness to their play. You know, Nigger and I were talking about it during the map. They still had some deaths that they shouldn't have had at all. You know, the mage proccing Cauterize a lot, forgetting to block on the first boss. They got to tighten that up, especially if they're hoping to, you know, come up against Sun or Skyline D, whatever it may be.
Exactly. Well, now we are going to have one more elimination series after this break. Then we will be jumping into that upper portion of the bracket. But folks, we only have the top 5 teams remaining in China. By the end of the day, we are only going to have one that reigns supreme. Darn it, for this region. Don't go anywhere. When we return, we're going to find out who these teams are going to be.